He has to understand my feelings or I'm being abused. He has to say or do certain things, otherwise I'm not okay inside. He has to avoid saying or doing certain things, otherwise it hurts my feelings. Why would you want to give anybody that kind of power? Hey, a quick message to the NT wives out there. You want to speak your autistic husband's love language? It's not going to be words of affirmation or acts of service or gifts or quality time or physical touch. Just stop pointing out what he's doing wrong. That's his love language. He would view that as a very loving thing to do. So with ASD, you have a lot of mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, just to name a few. And so all that results in a lot of unpredictability in your life. And so what are you going to do if you have a lot of unpredictability? You're going to try to create as much predictability as possible. And one of the best ways to create predictability, if you live in a world of unpredictability, you're going to gravitate to your special interests and you're going to want to hyper-focus on that special interest for extended periods of time. Why? Because his special interest provides a lot of predictability. Unpredictability creates a ton of anxiety. In fact, it's one of the main reasons he's chronically anxious. And so his special interest is one thing that he can count on, one thing that never changes, one thing that is predictable, one thing that doesn't raise his anxiety. So it's not that he is purposely trying to avoid you, is that he's purposely trying to avoid unpredictability, and unfortunately you just happen to be one of those things that are highly unpredictable. Quick message to NT spouses. Think of your autistic husband as a battery, and he will only be able to engage in social activities that are laden with emotional intricacies for so long before his battery is dead. And how does he recharge his battery? He goes and engages in his special interest. That was Quinn. You've heard of the law of attraction, right? That works in relationships too. And so the more you observe what's going wrong, the more you think about what's going wrong, the more you talk about what's going wrong, the more you try to fix what's going wrong, the more you grow and attract what's going wrong. So we could say that if you believe in the law of attraction, which I do, and it works whether you believe it or not, and you're affected by it whether you believe it or not, then we could say that that's why you're having the level of difficulty that you're having, because it's become the number one focus. It's been a priority. What can we do instead? Flip it on its head. And that would be, I'm going to start observing the one or two things that are going right instead of the 99 things that are going wrong. I'm going to observe the things that are going right. I'm going to focus on those. I'm going to think about those. I'm going to talk about those. I'm going to mention those things when they occur and try to grow that. Try to attract that. Try to let that be the new focus. You are a creator. Whether you believe it or not, doesn't matter to me. You're creating anyway. Are you creating drama and chaos? Or are you creating harmony? Message to the NT wives out there. Your well-oiled, finely tuned, exceedingly intelligent emotional brain is your emotional guidance system. It is your guidance system. It helps you to understand how to process things. It helps you to understand what to say and do in certain situations. It helps you with your decision-making processes, just to name a few. Can you imagine not having that guidance system? I said, can you imagine not having that guidance system? The answer is no, you cannot. So, if you could, you would know what your autistic husband is going through. You're operating on all 8 cylinders with your emotional guidance system. He doesn't have 8 cylinders. The more you talk about the past, the more you preserve the past. The more you bring up the past, the more you relive the past. The more you think about, focus on and feel the emotional pain of the past, the more you bring the past into the present moment. It's a very destructive cycle. I'm letting you off the hook for being responsible for my feelings. And I'm letting you off the hook for being responsible for my self-esteem. And I'm letting you off the hook for being responsible for how I download your behavior. In a sense, there's really two types of neurotypical wives. On the one hand, you have the wife who expects some end result, some completed task from her autistic husband before she's going to offer him any kind of words of appreciation or acknowledgement that he's doing something right. In other words, he has to follow through, and there needs to be some completion of some type of a social skill or some kind of a emotional reciprocity before she offers any words of encouragement to him, if she offers any words at all. And then on the other hand, you have the NT wife that rewards effort. In other words, she sees that he's at least trying, and maybe he hasn't quite accomplished the thing that she wants him to complete, but at least he's trying, and she appreciates that, and she says, hey, I notice that you're putting forth some effort, and I appreciate that. And she rewards him with a little bit of acknowledgement and a word of appreciation, which, guess what, is very positively reinforcing for him. And he feels, I'm actually doing something right. And then he wants to continue to work at it. And now he's more motivated to actually hit the finish line. So of those two NT wives, guess which one gets more cooperation from her husband? I already know you know the answer. Quick message to the NT spouses out there. Why would you shame your autistic husband and guilt trip your autistic husband and then expect him not to explode in some version of a meltdown? That's like saying, I want to play with dynamite, but I don't want it to explode. No, if you're going to shame, throw, and guilt trip, you're going to be on the receiving end of some kind of meltdown or shutdown or an adult temper tantrum, and that's just going to come with the territory. And by the way, your shaming and guilting is not going to change behavior. It's going to increase that behavior. That's Tobias. You can make a point or you can keep the peace, but you can't do both, not at the same time. You might think, well, we should be able to make a point and keep the peace at the same time. Hasn't worked that way for the last 10 years. What makes you think it's going to work that way later this afternoon? You can do one or the other. You can't do both. I'm not suggesting which one to do. You decide what's best for you in the moment. But if you make a point, you're sacrificing the peace. And if you opt to keep the peace, you may very well be sacrificing an opportunity to make a point. You pick your choice. But if you decide to make a point, don't bitch about the fact that there's no peace. Quick message to the NT spouses out there. You can't demand that your autistic husband understand your feelings, because that demanding doesn't help him establish understanding. It doesn't fix the problem. It just puts more pressure on him, which will muddy the waters. You can't demand that he provides you with emotional reciprocity. You can't demand that he loves you. Why not? Because demanding is a very unloving thing, and you can't expect loving things in return when you're doing unloving things. You can't insist on empathy when you're being insensitive to his traits. You can't insist on him being a mature adult when you're being parental. It simply doesn't work like that. So, long story short, you will have to exhibit the behavior that you want to see. I'm sorry. I know the NTs are thinking, oh, so the ball's back in my court again, huh? I'm the one that has to do the work. Yeah. You will only get what you want when you offer the words that you want to hear, the behavior that you want to see. That's the way the universe works. I'm not saying it's good, bad, right, or wrong, fair, unfair. At some level, it does seem unfortunate that it works like that, but that's the way it is. Okay, so a few important points for the neurotypical individuals out there that are just now beginning a relationship with someone on the autism spectrum. You can view ASD level 1 as a disorder of insight into the thoughts and feelings of others. It's just about that simple. Let me repeat that. Think of ASD as a disorder of insight into the thoughts and feelings of others. If you'll keep that in mind, a lot of stuff will make sense as you progress through the development of this relationship with someone on the autism spectrum. Also, know that it's going to be hard for you to understand your ASD spouse's needs. He may be interested in things that seem very boring to you, and he may find seemingly normal social situations very stressful. Also, remember that he may not be able to read all the social cues that you understand without even trying. Also, keep in mind that getting very upset with him because he's not as intuitive as you is probably not going to be the best way to get through to him. Also, understand that all the unwritten rules of behavior are going to be very confusing to him. Something that you think is obvious is not going to be obvious to your ASD spouse. ASD individuals may not be able to project their mind into hypothetical situations or put themselves in someone else's shoes. They may not immediately recognize your needs. That doesn't mean they're being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, and so on. It's called mind blindness. And also your ASD spouse or partner may have a lack of perception about your motives. But bear in mind that this is largely due to mind blindness issues rather than blatant selfishness or narcissism. Lastly, understand that in some cases the ASD partner or spouse is simply not going to get better or be transformed into the husband you thought you married. Even so, certain behavior can be modified or changed, which can make daily life less stressful for you and him. And counseling can help big time, but it has to be somebody who has some expertise in ASD. Don't go to a neurotypical counselor because he or she is not going to factor in mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, and so on. So you need to find somebody who understands the neurodiverse marriage that will help you establish routines and agreeable timetables and will go into a deep dive of how to talk to one another and what kind of language needs to be used. There's this thing called childhood trauma where he tried to fit in, couldn't fit in some worst case scenarios. He was ostracized, bullied, teased, rejected. And he thought, I'm no good at this social game, so I'm just going to find a special interest of a non-social nature and I'm going to hyper-focus on that and I'm just going to detach from the world. Which is not a great move on one hand because now he's missing opportunities to gain social skills. Then he grows up being on the receiving end of disapproval pretty much his entire life. Then he hooks up with this NT wife, and things go well for a while. But after a short while, she gets unhappy because she's experiencing some of these traits and labeling it something that it's not. And then now yet again, you're hooked up with somebody who, now you're on the receiving end again of disapproval. It is a developmental disorder, which simply means that developmentally, the social and emotional part of the brain is underdeveloped. You could think of it as a deficit in emotional literacy and social skills, with one huge caveat. Pay attention. A deficit in emotional literacy and social skills, but almost exclusively when he's trying to relate to his significant other. With his coworkers, and they're talking about perhaps his work is his special interest. He's talking to his coworkers. They don't know if he has ASD or not. The neighbors, they won't know. His friends that he bowls with or golfs with, they would have no clue. Why would you be the one to have the clue? Because his social and emotional weaknesses reveal themselves when he's in a situation where he has to be firing on all 8 cylinders, but he doesn't have 8 cylinders. I'm not saying he doesn't have any empathy or doesn't know anything about emotions or doesn't have any social skills. No, he does, but he's at his weakest with you. And if that's not the truth, neither one of you would be here. The whole point of doing this little backdrop is nobody did anything wrong. She, the NT wife, is wired to be connective, bonding, nurturing, emotional, etc. The guy on the autism spectrum is almost wired 180 degrees opposite of that. He's task-oriented. He's low in social and emotional needs. He's highly logical. So that's why we have this issue. So It would be great unless the resentment is so deep that you just can't bring yourself to doing it, in which case I'm not going to be judgmental. It would be best for the neurodiverse couple to extend one another a little grace and mercy given the dynamics at play. My term, instead of masking, is mimicry. You have mimicked what you felt like was typical, appropriate behavior. It's like, I'm not sure exactly what to say or do in this particular situation, but I'm witnessing them say and do things in the same situation, and it seems to work for them, so I'm going to copy that. In the case with you, assuming you have ASD level 1, that's just a really fucking smart thing to do. That was a very intelligent move on your part. And I would say, don't you ever throw that away. That's a skill that you have cultivated very well, and you want to keep it. All people do that to some degree. So I don't want you to think that, well, because I have to act, that there's something wrong with me or somehow I'm defective or flawed. No. You are an individual who thinks differently. We'll call it autism, but you're living in a neurotypical world. If you only spoke English and you were forced to live in Russia and you didn't know the language, you would pretty quickly figure out a few things to get by so that people didn't get mad at you, so that they didn't get irritated with you when they're trying to talk to you and you don't understand much of what they're saying, and you notice that they get annoyed with you when you don't understand them, and somebody else comes up to talk to you in Russian, and they're trying to get a point across, and you don't understand them, and you notice, okay, when people come up to me and try to connect with me and I act as if I don't understand what they're saying, which I don't, they get upset with me. So I'm going to act as if I understand. I'm going to pretend like I get it. And that's a survival mechanism that you had to have. Thank God you have it. Then the other piece of this equation was, how can I just be true to myself? You know, when do I turn this on? When do I turn it off? There's no shame in having this disorder. It's more widespread than you know. There is more tolerance now than there was even 10 years ago. We know that this doesn't mean that somebody is retarded or stupid or narcissistic or sociopathic. That's outdated, old school myths. That's by the wayside for the vast majority of society today. So there's nothing wrong with divulging, well, I'm just going to use the term blind spot. There's nothing wrong with divulging your blind spots to the people that are important to you. I'm going to make up an example that may or may not apply, but hopefully it will help you understand. You could say to somebody that you trust, being around this large of a crowd with all this noise really stresses me out. And so if I'm acting a little off, just to let you know, really have sensory overload right now.
Hey guys, this is Mark, and I got an email from one of my clients, and this is a neurotypical wife who's married to an ASD level 1 husband. And she said that her husband says that he doesn't have low self-esteem. He said, my husband disagrees with you, Mark, that in this case, guys on the autism spectrum, most of them, if not all of them, have low self-esteem. He goes, no. He said his self-esteem is fully intact. Okay? So then I asked her, I said, well, does he view your constructive criticism as an attack? Does he view your attempt to try to work on the relationship as a personal affront? Does he download your suggestions for improvement as you being parental? And she says, yes, yes, and yes. Then I also ask her, well, does he ever have shutdowns or just a full-blown adult temper tantrum? She goes, yes and yes. Okay, that's not somebody with high self-esteem. People with high self-esteem don't view constructive criticism as an attack. People with high self-esteem don't view neutral comments as an attack. And they don't view working on the relationship conversations as stress. And they don't shut down. So, those of you who are on the autism spectrum think your self-esteem is high, then that means you're also not shutting down or melting down or having adult temper tantrums. You're not downloading your neurotypical spouse's good messages as a personal attack, and so on.
It's not uncommon when she is upset. In fact, it's very common for her when she is upset to start interrogating and bombshelling you with a bunch of questions. And when she does that, you have laid your own trap. So this is for Stephanie and all the other ladies that might be listening. When you're upset and you start launching questions, you have just set your own trap. A barrage of questions is an attack. Listen, ladies, I'm talking to the ladies, even though the men are the only one hearing me in this moment. A barrage of questions is an attack. He's going to instantly feel anxious and instantly get in defense mode. If she's anxious, that's when she needs to not be asking questions. She needs to go calm down, whether we're talking about anxiety or anger, either one. She needs to go calm down, and then she needs to come back with 1 or 2 questions. Even if she's calm and she gets in interrogation mode, it's still going to have the same net result of your anxiety coming up. Your brain's going to short circuit. You're only going to be able to listen to about 80% of what she says. You're only going to understand 60% of that. You're only going to retain 40% of that. You're only going to implement 20% of that. She's getting hardly any return on her investment of time and energy if she's coming at you with a bunch of questions while she's anxious and or angry.
Assertiveness would be, I'm going to make my concerns known, but I'm going to try to do it in a way that doesn't backfire. Okay, well, that needs some explanation. How am I going to make my concerns known without backfiring? In an ideal world, you would want to be sensitive to the things that he's at risk of. He's at risk of anxiety. Well, how can you help with that? You can keep the conversation short, concrete, one problem at a time. Don't bring up the past unless it's pertinent to the present. Don't talk about feelings. He doesn't understand feelings. Just talk in terms of needs. So you are going to let your concerns be known. You're not going to put them in the closet. You need to talk to him about it, but when you talk to him about it, you need to keep it, here's the summary. Keep your message short, concrete, simple. Talk in terms of needs, and only talk about that one concern. Don't drag 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other concerns in on that conversation. Don't bring up the past unless it's pertinent to the present. I know sometimes you have to bring up the past because the thing never got resolved. So if you would just think in terms of how can I get this message across without raising his anxiety too much. Anytime you need to have the talk, you can bet he's already going to be anxious about it. So we're not talking about anxiety elimination. We're talking about anxiety reduction, which now you've reduced him reverting to some form of shutdown or meltdown. So in this way, you were able to assert yourself and give him your good message, and it didn't get lost this time because you've always had a good message, but your delivery raised his anxiety, and then your good message got lost.
He's a very independent player, and he's not going to decompress to the level that he needs to decompress in your company. I'm not saying that he can't have fun with you. I'm not saying that he can't enjoy time together, but his restorative decompression, well, you'll have to be absent. And I want to validate to you that I totally understand why that, I'm talking to the NTYs, totally understand why that would feel hurtful. It's like, so he has to have time away from me in order to get restorative decompression. Don't take it personally. He has to be away from everybody, not just you. He has to be away from life, and one of the ways he decompresses is to escape from life and get engrossed in his special interest for a while. And now he gets his battery recharged. That's the way it's going to work, but I understand that sometimes you can download that as rejection.
As she is droning on and providing too much data on what she thinks the problem is, and she's talking very much in the social emotional area, there's 2 problems that's going on with him. One, you're not speaking his language, and so he's out of the loop with what you're talking about and not quite getting it, and he knows he's not getting it. So he feels dumb. And then because he's not getting it,
as quickly as you want him to get it. You may have chastised him or scolded him or talked to him about how he's falling short, how he doesn't validate, doesn't listen, he's not empathic, and so on. He's not reciprocal in the emotional sense. So now he feels attacked. So you have the guy over here who now feels dumb and he feels attacked. And this causes a lot of anxiety. That's point 3. Causes a lot of anxiety. And so what would he want to do when these conversations pretty much at this point always cause anxiety? He's going to want to reduce his anxiety. How does he reduce his anxiety? Well, that's either going to be a meltdown or a temper tantrum or a shutdown, or he's just going to sit there and look at you and pretend like he's listening in hopes that you will shut up here shortly. But unfortunately, your message gets lost. It didn't go in one ear and out the other. It didn't even go in the one ear. Because as he's sitting here giving you the impression that he's listening, he's off in fantasy land over here. He's fishing or he's skiing or he's worrying about what he's going to have to do at work tomorrow. He's not even in the room. But you think he's there, so you keep talking. That is the main thing that I run into, is the communication breakdown. And I just kind of explained a gross oversimplification, I understand, and it even sounded a little critical. The reason for the communication breakdown is because she's coming at it from one angle and he's not getting it from that angle. And so that causes problems for him because now he feels like I don't get it. And when I don't get it, I get in trouble. So he wants to talk less and less and less and less. And he goes further and further, and he gets to the point where he dreads having the talk. We got to have a talk. He's instantly anxiety before you've even got 2 words out of your mouth. Having said all of that, what one of the main goals should be, it may or may not be one of the main goals in this group, depending on what you guys need. But one of the main goals should be, in my opinion, is to find a communication strategy such that you guys can actually talk about difficult stuff. How many of you in here have even given up about talking about difficult stuff? Because it always ends like a shit show.
And this is a little message to spouses on the autism spectrum who are easily offended and download even neutral comments from their NT spouse as criticism. So here's a few questions. Do you frequently feel offended by the remarks or actions of your NT spouse? Do you take every minor event too seriously, allowing it to scare you or piss you off? Do you mistake your NT spouse's antics for subtle insults? You know what? Taking things too personally makes life very difficult. When you take things too personally, you make yourself more vulnerable to anger, frustration, and meltdowns and shutdowns. Taking things too personally is like intentionally placing a heavy load on your shoulders. Why would you want to do that? Here's what I've discovered. Most of the time, the way somebody acts towards me has little to do with me. In some cases, has nothing to do with me. It's more to do with how this person was raised, how he or she deals with emotional issues, or other variables like his or her mood, energy level, or health, or maybe that person is just having a bad day. This is important for me to keep in mind on those occasions when I find myself taking blame for things that are beyond my control. Perhaps you would want to do the same.
What's really confusing to him is when she says how she feels, and she leaves it there. And he's supposed to take how she feels and figure out some course of action he's supposed to implement based on that feeling. That never gets done. And then she feels, what, that selfish bastard? And he's going, I guess I'm supposed to learn how to read her feelings and read her mind because I'm always doing this guesswork. And then I get in trouble for not knowing. So sometimes I don't ask because I'm afraid as soon as I ask, I've revealed myself as an idiot who was supposed to get it and didn't get it. She would say, I'm just using a generic she, at the top of her list, she might say, I have an intimacy deficit on her scorecard. If we were to look at the ASD man scorecard, the number one thing on his card would be, I don't get any appreciation. So ladies, your intimacy deficit, if we wanted to come up with the counter version for him, that's his appreciation deficit. I think it would go without saying that the more appreciation expressed, probably the more intimacy you would get.
If you have a spouse with ASD level 1, you may have a spouse who's very logic-oriented. This individual needs to know the reasons for the rules before he's okay. Blindly accepting your rules is not the way he operates.
He wants to know the reasons behind your actions, why something is done a certain way, and it has to make sense to him. If it seems too arbitrary, it's not an adequate reason in his mind, and he won't listen. His coping strategy is to try to make sense of the world through logic, reasoning, and rational thought. He wants the world to be a place with order and rationality to it. This reduces his anxiety. He will usually become more flexible when he knows the reason for something. The rule alone is not sufficient. After you've explained the reason for your request, you are likely to get more cooperation from him. However, he may not accept your logic unless it is quite convincing, because he may very well have his own reasons and explanations. His view of the world is based on logic and reasons, which can also cause him to be overly analytical. In this case, he often can't function appropriately because he never gets past the analysis stage to the action stage. We could say that in this case, he suffers from analysis paralysis. So what is the NT spouse to do? You will need to explain why something needs to be done or why it can't be done before you'll get compliance. For the logic-oriented individual, understanding precedes cooperation. If your explanations provide him with information he didn't have, might have overlooked, or didn't understand, you will have helped him clarify how desired action is beneficial to him. Now, for those who overanalyze, you'll have to help him reduce the amount of analysis by helping him see how it is unproductive. So now let's look at the rule-oriented individual with ASD level 1. Rule-oriented. Having a set of rules to live by is the most important issue for this individual. If there is a void where a rule has not been established, the rule-oriented individual is not happy because he doesn't know what to do in that situation. And since he doesn't know what to do, he makes up his own rules. And any situation that has too few rules will be a bad one for this type of person. He must have rules to live by, and he will create his own if there aren't any available. And his rules will probably not match what others are thinking. Also, this person tends to respect authority figures and does well when it's perfectly clear who's in charge and who makes the rules. This person will tend to do very well at work, but can be a real problem at home because the rules are not clear enough at home. It's not unusual for the NT spouse of this type of individual to be quite surprised to hear how well he does at work and gets along with everybody and can be conversational and might even be the smartest person at work, but then at home it's as if he shifts to a different personality. This individual will become distressed by others who do not follow the rules. He may monitor others' actions and will remind them what they're doing wrong and can sometimes come off as being the rule police. But bear in mind that this behavior is all about anxiety reduction. The rule-oriented individual manages his anxiety by following the rules and making sure others do too. And problems only occur for them when rules are absent or vague, or the person in charge lacks authority in their eyes. And today I want to talk to the NT wives, or husbands as the case may be. When you go on too long with your message delivery, or when you try to tackle more than one issue at a time, your ASD spouse is going to run into brain overload. We're just going to call it data overload because you're providing too much data too quickly. He's not able to absorb all of that. And so at some point in your message delivery, let's say, for example, it's a 20-minute discussion, or in this case, perhaps a monologue, he's going to get to the point where he's not going to be able to listen or understand or retain. So think of your ASD spouse as that old computer that you used to have that has so much software on it and so little memory space that when you turn it on and you work on it for a little while, it slows down, and at some point it freezes, and then you have to shut it down and reboot it. And then it takes forever to start up again, but then when it does, it kind of runs a little faster than it did previously. So your husband on the autism spectrum is like that slow computer. And the more data dumping you do, the more data overload he runs into. And then the rest is history, because at some point he can't even listen to you anymore because all he can focus on is his anxiety or how he's feeling criticized. And if you continue to data dump, he's only going to be able to listen to 80% of your message. And as you continue to data dump, he's only going to be able to understand 60% of what he listens to. And as you continue to data dump, he's only going to be able to retain 40% of what he understands. And as you continue to data dump, he's only going to implement about 10% of what he retained. So of your 100% message delivery, you're only getting about a 10% return on your investment of time and energy. I hope that makes sense. So here are some examples of data dumping. When you talk too long, when you tackle more than one issue at a time, when you come at him when you're emotional or upset, either angry or crying, when you come at him with poor timing, in other words, he's not prepared, he didn't know that you were going to have the talk, he's doing something else. So you're coming at him at a very inappropriate time for him because it disrupts his routine or structure. The other component of data dumping would be when you speak in vague terms, especially when you talk about how you feel and expect him to take how you feel and apply it to some course of action he's supposed to take. Okay? Feelings, especially if you have alexithymia, are vague. So your expression of feelings is not his motivation to change. And lastly, another data dumping component would be jumping from the current issue to multiple past issues that he can't fix now. So there it is. Your data dumping downloads as data overload. Then he is going to do some version of a meltdown or a shutdown. Literally, he's going to have to shut down and reboot. So today I want to talk about how to reduce your relationship stress. This is specifically for people on the autism spectrum, although it can certainly apply to the neurotypical partners as well. But in order to help you reduce your relationship anxiety, we have to talk about scattered thinking, because scattered thinking is the number one source of your anxiety. And scattered thinking looks exactly like this. It's thoughts that we have in the past and in the future. Thoughts in the past would be ruminations and regrets. Ruminations would be where you play the movie in your mind about the hurtful things that the other person said or did, or maybe they didn't follow through with something you wanted them to say or do. Regrets would be the things that you said or did that you wish you had not, or maybe things that you wish you had followed through with but you did not. Also in the past, we have neutral reflections and positive reflections. A neutral reflection would simply be remembering something in the past that wasn't good, bad, right, or wrong. You were just kind of indifferent about it. It happened, and it's not a big deal. Positive reflection is pleasant memories of something that happened in the past, something that somebody said or did that was quite nice. Another way we have scattered consciousness is dealings with the future. So that would include worry, which is you're overly concerned about what somebody might say or do, or you're overly concerned that the person will not follow through with something that you do want to be said or done. And then we have neutral anticipation, which is expecting something to happen that's not good, bad, right, or wrong. You're kind of indifferent about it. For example, you expect to go to work tomorrow. And then we have positive anticipation, which is you're looking forward to something that might happen or that you know will definitely happen. For example, you have a planned vacation next month. So this is how we get lost in the past and in the future, which by default removes us from the present moment. We're no longer in the here and now. We're lost in our head. And with ruminations and regrets about the past, alongside worries about the future, your anxiety goes up, 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 which makes it even more unlikely that you will be able to be present in the moment, focusing on the here and now. So of these different forms of consciousness, we want to keep the positive reflections, we want to keep the positive anticipations, and we want to throw in the third and most important one, which is being here now, being focused on the present moment, being mindful of what's going on with your breathing, with your body, with the task at hand, instead of getting lost in a negative sense in the past or the future. So, in summary, to reduce your anxiety, you're going to make your consciousness less scattered, which means you're going to focus on positive reflection, positive anticipation, and being in the present moment. Those three and those three alone. I want to validate you with what I'm getting ready to say because there's 3 or 4 things, I don't know, we'll find out the exact number, but I'm sure there's at least 3 or 4 things that have made your situation really problematic. You might identify with some of this or perhaps all of it. And I'm not faulting him. This isn't a criticism of him. This is validation of you. If you're like most of the people I work with, when you first met him, you were to some degree his special interest, and you got nurturing, perhaps, although some of these ladies goes, now, it was really not so great from the beginning, but that's the minority of cases. He kind of stepped up to the plate in the early going, and so you thought, and I am speaking in generalities here, that, hey, nice guy, maybe I'll spend my life with him. You didn't realize at the time, and maybe you're still not sure if he hasn't had an assessment, that he was, I don't like the term masking because that implies there's some deceit. What's really going on there is he wanted you to like him. But it certainly wasn't the thing you signed up for. So it's almost a moot point to toy around with different terms. He wanted you to like him. Obviously you were important to him, or he wouldn't have cared. He would just been his regular old self. So that's kind of strike number 1, that you got into something and it looked like an apple and it turned out to be a banana. And the second thing is, with this developmental disorder, it's not like bipolar, for example, where there's medication that can get this person functioning just fine, or like maybe antisocial personality disorder, where in some cases, if not most cases, those symptoms lessen with age. This is a developmental disorder, which means that there's no medication for it, and sometimes it gets worse with age. That's another problem. And then the other problem is, due to his mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, and anxiety, it's hard for him to see his role in the dysfunction, and it's even harder for him to know what he's supposed to be doing differently. So I'm validating that there was a lot of things at play that made life very difficult for you. Now, the problem is, though, you're already in it. Unless you're, which is not my recommendation, unless you're planning for divorce, you're already in it. And so for your benefit, not so much his, although he might benefit as a nice side effect, we have to think in terms of what you can do to be taking care of you, given those cards that you have been dealt. And it's a hell of a dilemma. It really is. So I think the message here that I want you to, at least, I'm just planting a seed today. You can dismiss it if you don't think it's going to help you at all. But sometimes less work is better. If you feel like you've been doing all of the relationship work, maybe it's time for you to adopt the mantra that less is better. If you, for example, one end of your house catches fire, and then you put that fire out, and then you begin the process of rebuilding that end of the house, but then for whatever reason, somebody sets fire to the other end of the house. And so now you got to put that fire out. Now you have 2 ends of the house that you're working on. And about the time you almost get done with the first fire, doing renovation, it catches fire again. So you're back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That may have been how you felt with him. It's like, I think that I get 4 steps forward with him, only to have my hopes dashed and go 5 steps back. And then I almost have to start all over again. So I want you to think in terms of effort involves either doing something or avoiding something. On one end, you're working on doing something, which is exhaustive. And on the other end, recommending that you begin the process of avoiding something. Now, avoiding something takes a lot of discipline, like biting your tongue, for example, but it doesn't take much time or effort. Doing has exhausted you. Avoiding will be the path of least resistance. And I'm not saying avoid everything. Some things you can't avoid, and that's fine. So there's 2 categories of poor doing. Doing that yields no positive result, and then also doing that actually makes a bad problem worse. You've experienced that. So with this idea in mind, you're trying to avoid the negatives. In other words, burning one end of the house. rather than exert some course of action. I'm not faulting you, but you're lecturing, arguing, pleading, negotiating, reasoning with, trying to share feelings in hopes that he'll get it. That has been too much of a waste of time and energy that has made you, it may have even affected your mental health or even physical health. So what I'd like for you to do, if you're so inclined, you don't have to do it now, but maybe soon, within the next day or so, I'd like for you to consider listing all the things that you've been doing or saying that yield no positive result or makes a bad problem worse. And then from that list, there's going to be some things on that list that you're going to have the thought, well, I'm just not going to be able to avoid doing that because it's important and I just can't sweep it under the rug. Totally understand that. But from the list, there's going to be a bunch of things where you think, I can probably avoid saying or doing that thing, and because it's not improving the situation, and too often it's making it worse. So list the things that you've been doing or saying that yields no positive result or makes the problem worse. Then from that list, pick those things that you're willing to avoid doing or saying, not so much for his benefit. This isn't extra work for you in order to help him. What you've been doing, I'm not faulting you, way more work than this. My term, instead of masking, is mimicry. You have mimicked what you felt like was typical, appropriate behavior. It's like, I'm not sure exactly what to say or do in this particular situation, but I'm witnessing them say and do things in the same situation, and it seems to work for them, so I'm going to copy that. In the case with you, assuming you have ASD level 1, that's just a really fucking smart thing to do. That was a very intelligent move on your part. And I would say, don't you ever throw that away. That's a skill that you have cultivated very well, and you want to keep it. All people do that to some degree. So I don't want you to think that, well, because I have to act, that there's something wrong with me or somehow I'm defective or flawed. No. You are an individual who thinks differently. We'll call it autism, but you're living in a neurotypical world. If you only spoke English and you were forced to live in Russia and you didn't know the language, you would pretty quickly figure out a few things to get by so that people didn't get mad at you, so that they didn't get irritated with you when they're trying to talk to you and you don't understand much of what they're saying, and you notice that they get annoyed with you when you don't understand them, and somebody else comes up to talk to you in Russian, and they're trying to get a point across, and you don't understand them, and you notice, okay, when people come up to me and try to connect with me, and I act as if I don't understand what they're saying, which I don't, they get upset with me. So I'm going to act as if I understand. I'm going to pretend like I get it. And that's a survival mechanism that you had to have. Thank God you have it. Then the other piece of this equation was, how can I just be true to myself? When do I turn this on? When do I turn it off? There's no shame in having this disorder. It's more widespread than you know. There is more tolerance now than there was even 10 years ago. We know that this doesn't mean that somebody is retarded or stupid or narcissistic or sociopathic. That's outdated, old school myths. That's by the wayside for the vast majority of society today. So there's nothing wrong with divulging, well, I'm just going to use the term blind spot. There's nothing wrong with divulging your blind spots to the people that are important to you. I'm going to make up an example that may or may not apply, but hopefully it will help you understand. You could say to somebody that you trust, being around this large of a crowd with all this noise really stresses me out. And so if I'm acting a little off, just to let you know, really have sensory overload right now.
So one common question that comes up from neurotypical spouses is, why does my autistic spouse prefer tasks over socializing? Well, to answer this question, we first need to look at the concept of weak predictive ability. If one has the ability to predict, he or she can come up with an educated guess about what may happen in the near or distant future. That is, some outcome is expected. But this ability is not necessarily based on experience or knowledge. Prediction is a skill that allows us to generalize. In other words, since the occurrence of situation A
resulted in outcome B, then a situation similar to A will likely result in an outcome similar to B. Prediction not only affords quicker and more accurate reaction, but also more efficient neural coding. Now, people on the autism spectrum have poor predictive abilities. In other words, they have great difficulty predicting future events. Another function of prediction is to fill in missing information. For example, if the driver in front of you veers his car sharply to the left and then to the right, you might predict that he swerved in order to avoid hitting something in the road. The autistic person's impaired predictive ability means impaired filling in of missing information for perception and action. So what does weak predictive ability have to do with a preference for tasks versus preferring to be with people and socializing? Well, since people on the autism spectrum have to live every day with the uncertainty inflicted by their poor predictive skills, they tend to favor relatively predictable and precise events and tasks. So as a result, they prefer dealing with facts, figures, objects, and so on, which are more predictable, instead of with people, which are less predictable. And I think you would agree that people are very unpredictable. So research, engineering, computers, other things that involves facts, figures, and objects have a much greater appeal to individuals who don't like a lot of unpredictability in their life. Due to difficulties with generalizing skills, people on the autism spectrum have a lower tolerance for unpredictability and complexity. They argue that figures, facts, objects, and associated tasks are predictable and simple, whereas people are not.
Now, this is a message to the neurotypical spouses out there that are trying to make sense of their autistic spouse's need for obsessions and repetitive behaviors. So the reasons that people on the autism spectrum develop obsessions can be varied and many. One of the things that goes on is it helps them cope with the uncertainties of daily life. It can help them to relax. It provides order and predictability because, as you may or may not know, the day-to-day routine for individuals on the autism spectrum is highly unpredictable. So that's why they prefer routines and basically thrive and crave and demand structure. Plus, they get a lot of enjoyment just from taking a deep dive on one special narrow area of interest. And also, if they have difficulty socializing, they will often use their special interest as a topic of discussion so that they can kind of fit in. So repetitive behaviors also serve a function as opposed to a dysfunction. Some people, when they are anxious, will revert to some repetitive behaviors. Sometimes people on the autism spectrum need to increase sensory input, and sometimes they need to reduce sensory input. So an attempt to reduce sensory input could be the result of needing to distract oneself from sensory overload. And one example of needing to gain sensory input could be if the individual is bored or needs some kind of a distraction to reduce anxiety. So there is numerous reasons for obsessions and repetitive behaviors. Just know that routines are very much anxiety reduction strategy for people with ASD. So set routines, times, particular routes and rituals all help the individual to make order out of an otherwise chaotic life. So you, as a neurotypical spouse, need to understand that your autistic spouse will have a strong preference for routines and sameness. He's not going to like change, especially surprise change. He's not going to want his routines to be disrupted. So please don't take that personally, or you can take it personally if you want to, but you're not going to get it changed. So predictability is an anxiety reduction strategy, and obsessions and repetitive behaviors help establish predictability. I got a statement from an NT wife, and she says that my ASD husband can't see the forest for the trees. Well, it is a common trait among autistic individuals that they see parts instead of the whole. And it's a problem in some settings, especially of a social and or emotional nature, but it's a terrific attribute in other areas. For example, it's an attribute if you're looking for deep space anomalies, such as an astronomer, or if you're looking at unique cells, like a lab technician would, or if you're looking for differences among species,
as a biological researcher would, or if you're looking for particular qualities of objects, for example, as a gemologist, antiques appraiser, or art historian. So it is hard for them to see the big picture when it comes to social and emotional nuances, but with things of a non-social nature, seeing the trees rather than the forest is actually a bonus.
So a quick message to the autistic husbands out there. Your neurotypical wife's feelings are a fact. If she has particular emotion going on inside of her, that emotion is a fact. For example, let's say that she lost her father recently, and she was grief-stricken at the loss of her father. That sense of loss, that feeling of grief is literally measurable if they were to do a brain scan. So that feeling is a fact. If she says, for example, I'm feeling sad that I don't get some of my intimacy needs met, that feeling is a fact. And you might say, well, Mark, she said, I feel that you don't love me, and I do love her. That's not a fact. You're right. Because if she says, I feel that you don't love me, that's not a feeling, that's a thought. So sometimes she will say, well, I feel such and such, and it's technically not a feeling, it's a thought. So her thoughts are not necessarily facts, but her feelings are, and so are yours. So when she's expressing her feelings, don't view it as, oh, she's so emotional, and oh, that can't be true. You don't feel that way. No, I'm sure she's not lying about her feelings. If she says she feels a certain way and she's actually using an emotion rather than a thought, she's not lying. That's what's going on. So when she's talking to you about her feelings, don't chalk it off as just a bunch of psychobabble with no factual basis. If you're feeling a particular way, let's say you're feeling mad at her, and I say, no, you don't feel mad. That's not reality. No, you would say, by God, I am mad, and it is a fact that I'm mad. So you understand now that feelings are facts. So when you enter a neurodiverse relationship and then on to the neurodiverse marriage, it's a lot like a boxing match and getting in the boxing ring. Some people play by a different set of rules. They may butt heads, they may knee you in the groin, they may step on your foot. So some people are going to abide by the standard boxing rules and some are not. They might hit below the belt, they might push you into the ropes, all kinds of things. And you have to know that this is just human nature. It's not just the experience that you're having in a neurodiverse marriage. If you think broadly, you run into people who don't play by the rules in general. If you're walking down the street and you trip over a rock, you don't get angry at the rock. So people are a lot like rocks that get in your way. They are, in a sense, obstacles from time to time for you. They have their own nature, and that nature isn't yours, and it's going to clash with you sometimes, and that's just what it means to be a human in general, but you may experience this to a larger degree in the neurodiverse marriage. So are you going to complain that people have a nature where they have an ego, or they can be passive-aggressive, or they cannot play by the rules, or they have weak moments and, quote, misbehave, unquote? And then in your constant complaining, you put yourself in a chronic disadvantage because you're draining yourself of a lot of energy that could be better used for other things. You're draining yourself with all these useless negative emotions, and you're not playing proper defense against your opponent, if we want to run with this boxing analogy, because you're all consumed with this kind of personalizing the situation, that this person shouldn't be doing these things, they shouldn't be hitting me, they shouldn't be getting in my way, they shouldn't be trying to defend themselves, they shouldn't be engaged in self-preservation, they shouldn't have their own fears and worries and anxieties. So instead, you have to create some distance between you and your opponent. And you have to do that in a very smart and intelligent way. That's called healthy emotional detachment. Not just your neurodiverse marriage, but other people in general. They're going to play a little dirty from time to time, and they're going to hit you, and it's going to hurt. But you don't whine and complain. You just figure out how you're going to defend yourself better. And one of the ways you defend yourself is not necessarily to hit back, but not make yourself vulnerable by putting yourself in harm's way time and time again. Or having very mature and convincing arguments that influence the other person to perhaps change their behavior.
And this is also a very common trait where, since anxiety is part of the situation, by default, therefore also some obsessive compulsive tendencies
are going to be part of the situation, because somebody who is high anxiety feels like they have little control of their environment. And so obsessive compulsive disorder, or tendencies, I'm not going to necessarily use the term disorder, is nothing more than an ongoing effort to control people in situations and circumstances. And so it's very common for the person with ASD to have anxiety. It's very common then for the person with anxiety to also have some obsessive compulsiveness going on. And what comes with that territory, of course, then is perfectionism. And it is very common for the person to want to have all their ducks in a row with step one before they move on to step two. That is an indication of perhaps an overly thinking brain, an overly logical brain. And the problem that arises there is the individual has a hard time moving on to step two until step one is perfect, or they have a hard time starting the project at all until they have everything ready to go. And what ends up happening then is a lot of procrastination, or starting a project and not being able to move on to step two so that the thing never gets completed. That's very typical, where he has such high standards for himself that it's impossible for him to meet, in essence.
Hey, this is Mark Hutten. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendar link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.